Change is inevitable, and as we've seen with automation and DevOps and stuff like that, and now with AI, things just move faster. So before, that change seemed to not happen as often. It used to be, oh, how often will we do this? Well, 6 to 10 times a quarter. Then it became 6 to 10 times a day.
Every AI initiative starts the same way. Small, exciting, and surprisingly useful. A chatbot that answers internal questions, a summarizer that gives you back an hour in your day, a bot that helps you write the greatest presentation. And then someone at the top goes, hey, that is useful, and starts asking for more, sparking a demand that begins to multiply exponentially. And then, boom, before you know it, what was once a side project, it becomes a business-critical mission that landed right on your plate. So here's the real tension that I'm seeing. When this happens, are organizations building these AI workloads intentionally, or are they just reacting as they grow? Welcome back to Edge of IT. I'm Jonathan Gough, and today we're talking about something I work on every day: how organizations scale AI workloads effectively without leaving a giant hole in infrastructure, security, or something even worse. To unpack that, I'm joined by two people who live right at the intersection of this AI ambition and product reality. Robbie Jerrom, Principal Technologist for AI at Red Hat, and Josh Minthorne, Director of Cloud DevSecOps and Automation at Pellera. Both these gentlemen live this work as I do. So in this episode, we get into the expenses that can arise from unexpected usage and reveal how you can reasonably get that little AI use case to something larger that everyone in your organization can use. This episode isn't about launching AI. That's the easy part. It's about growing responsibly. Gentlemen, welcome. Glad to have you here today.
Glad to be here.
Thank you for inviting me, Jonathan.
So let's just jump in. Robbie, when you look across the organizations that you're supporting, what challenges do you see right now as these AI use cases move into production?
We've gone from the excitement of AI to how do we do something impactful with it? We've gone from just sort of a Q&A, hey, this is a cool thing, answering me questions, to how do we actually connect to that AI system to our data? And that question, and I think you alluded to it in the intro, is where we're seeing enterprises go, right, well, actually, how do we do something meaningful? How do we connect it either to our APIs and through some agentic workflows, or just how does it take our policies? How does it take our documents and answer stuff in a meaningful way? So that intersection of AI model and data repositories are where we're seeing a lot of the conversations with customers today. They're used to dropping a couple of PDFs into a chatbot and getting a response, but it changes when you've got 10,000 PDFs and some Excel spreadsheets and some PowerPoints. That becomes the real challenge.
Right. When it works for a small group of people, it's great and everybody loves it. Everybody gets excited. But then when we try to take this to hundreds, thousands, the entire organization, it's the integration part that's almost always the hard part.
It's easy to run a small system or small Kubernetes cluster. But when you have hundreds or thousands of users or hundreds of thousands of nodes, it becomes hard. Scale is difficult. And this is a new kind of scale with some new technology, both at the infrastructure and obviously at the application level. And there's a lot of learning along the way.
Josh, from your perspective, what are the things that you see that are different this time with AI that weren't before when we were raising up lots of different new applications and managing them?
One way to answer that is a question of, well, what doesn't necessarily change? So when you think of building the models, if you think of that in a way as like building an application, building a microservice, well, you've got to build it. You're going to do some internal testing, and then it goes through and it gets deployed, eventually makes it to production, and it runs. And now it's operating and you're watching it. While some of those underlying pieces will change, the SDLC part of that doesn't really, right? We've been doing that for years, both mainframe, distributed. But what really and truly changes is you have to be far more cognizant of the resources that are required. When you write an application, you can do some testing and you say, all right, it's only going to take X CPUs and X amount of RAM. But when you think of the AI workloads, those models start to take in more, or there's more data, they start to churn. Well, for them to run, they need more compute. So really what's important and what starts to change is early on, start to look at what you think the consumption is going to be and really start to optimize and make models very, very compact, make them very, very efficient. But then also when you get out into things being running, you've got to keep an eye on things. It's got to be, hey, we're looking at this. When do we need to be able to respond to say we need to provide potentially more compute and resources to it? It's very much like what we saw with Kubernetes is you get, let's say, fluctuations in seasonal business. You could spin stuff up and you can spin stuff down so you can allocate resources, CPUs, stuff like that, and then you can move them away and save them for some other workload. Well, that same paradigm is still here, but it can happen very, very quickly, but it needs to be definitely a forethought as you go through this journey of adopting and starting to deploy AI workloads.
I hadn't heard that before, Josh. The parallel to Kubernetes, right? We went from like everybody using boxed servers that were constrained to using VMs to Kubernetes, which was just so much more flexible, right? Scale up, scale down, be able to handle those workloads, made day two operations much easier. But we also had like that 20 years of history where everybody could put their finger in the wind and understand, I know this is what's going to happen, whether they had the data or not. But now we're just into uncharted territory because we don't have 20 years. We've got 3 years. And what has changed in the last 3 years is what would change in over 20 years, the previous 20 years for regular compute.
And if you think of Kubernetes, that was used and developed by Google. So they were using it out in production. It had been tested. What's happening now is AI and the tooling and how that's advancing. Organizations aren't 3 years behind of what they're seeing out in the market. They're 6 months. Everybody's moving together and it's going to continue to pick up pace.
It just hit me when I first started in tech. Someone said, the bad idea is testing in prod. And that's what we're doing. We're moving so quickly because it's moving so quickly. The value is there that we're putting things in production that are almost certainly going to break because they haven't been tested because they keep changing. Like you and I, we're losing our hair over it.
Right.
You're right there. I mean, we're putting things into production that we've never used before because enterprises have never been able to apply it to an AI model before. So infrastructure, yes, we can stand up a model, we can provide an endpoint. And there's some learnings there that, unlike microservices, an AI model can take 20 minutes, 60 minutes, an hour to actually start up, which is a shock to your DevOps workflows. But equally, that context that's going into the system, that knowledge that we're sharing, those questions, those user interactions, they're completely undefined. We're not sure, how much compute it's going to need until the rubber hits the road and users start using it. Very difficult to predict what they're going to ask and how systems are going to respond. And because that's different for every organization, there isn't really a strong playbook other than, as you say, Jonathan, stand something up and then see what happens and watch your user community and adjust on the fly.
This points to the scaling problem. I think back to the first ML project I did. We went in and we asked the client, well, how often are you going to use this? We are only going to do this like 6 to 10 times a quarter. That's it. That's what we need. Beautiful. We'll design for like 10 times that. When we put it in their hands, it suddenly went from 6 to 10 times a quarter to 6 to 10 times a day. That's not a small difference. You give somebody a toy that provides value to them, you have no idea how much they're going to hit that and increase that workload. Let's get practical. Like when an organization decides to scale an AI workload, Robbie, how do you walk them through a proper needs analysis?
It's incredibly difficult. You've got some metrics from their small user testing. I think back to the first learning I got was the first time I exposed developers to a coding model. And we thought, hey, this is pretty neat. We'll give it to a few developers. And then the next time we looked at the dashboard, there was 150 developers using it. And it just spiraled out of control. That was the first time we watched the system completely crash because it just didn't have the resources. And we had to go and ask for more GPUs almost the second day. And the second day we had more developers and more developers. the requirements on the system just kept doubling almost every hour. And we couldn't turn it off. We sent messages out saying, hey, could you guys back off? And because they were seeing something really cool and new, the answer was no. We had to really gate access to these systems. You had to scale slowly. And to do some of it, you have to take the toys away from the users that are seeing the value. And that's a user problem. Customers are always surprised. They're surprised by the speed of adoption. So we talk a lot about guardrailing and how we can protect the model responses and the user requests coming in, which introduces another scaling problem. That's another model, another workflow wrapped around your application. So back to your point, production is very different from that initial testing. And then user community monitoring and management is another skill around these things.
That's an interesting conundrum to be in, right? We need to throttle the team because the model is helping them be too productive. I'm curious, Josh, how do you approach that cost conversation?
So the cost conversation is always, here's why I don't draw a parallel. If you go into a factory that's making widgets, they know the cost of every piece that goes into that widget. They know for every machine that's a part of that process, they know its throughput, and there's a cost allocation to that. And then there's people that are involved, right? So it's very easy to say, to make this widget, it costs me X as long as I'm making X per, let's say, month. AI, when you look at these workloads, they tend to actually be far more qualitative. So really that cost conversation needs to come down to a business case. What are you really trying to do? How are you trying to use this to potentially improve the business? What are you trying to actually achieve? You got to kind of get it out there and see what happens and see what the adoption is. I think it's great that the fact that, as Robbie said, 20 developers, 50 developers, 100 developers, and they said, no, you can't turn this off, because that was immediate validation of how valuable that new piece of functionality, what that AI workload was providing. That cost conversation, again, always comes back to, what are you really trying to achieve with this? And then, okay, let's make sure that you're set up in a way that you don't get out of control costs and you're maximizing GPUs and other things, but also that you can support this, which comes down to that people and process perspective on that operational side of things.
I really like that, Josh. And the factory example you gave there of the widgets, it's a great one because there's two paths when it comes to the sort of the AI workflows. There's the using AI to reduce toil for internal teams, whether that's summarizing documents, creating documents, responding to emails. They're quite lightweight, but often very time-consuming activities that everyone has to do. They sit across the whole organization, and if you probably sat down and analyzed it, many, many hours are lost every day to some of those small interactions. It's hard to quantify. And then you have the other path with AI, which is how do we do something with a product that we can potentially measure? There's application uses for this that you can quantify, and you can say, right, we can produce 10, 50, 100 more widgets an hour by using AI in this way. And those are the conversations you have to have with the customer around what's the first decision point? What are you trying to achieve? So maybe it's about pushing your NPS score up, or are you wanting to infuse AI into your business and create more widgets or design a better widget, which is a little more quantifiable. It's easier to build the business case around, then often helps you justify the internal projects using AI.
It depends. Every customer, right? It's different. So it's always, okay, let's sit down and talk about, hey, what are you trying to do? What do you need for infrastructure, for budget, whatever it is? Why? What are you trying to do? It's going to depend, not necessarily per business, right? Per industry. It's actually within the business and what they're trying to achieve. And I think more and more that as companies start to adapt to this, those things are going to start to come out, because a lot of this, as we're talking about, we're moving very, very fast. Every company is in their own R&D, and then everybody together, it's R&D, right? They're all trying to figure out how they do this. And as we get more information about the impact that AI has, right, it'll be easier to say, hey, companies that, let's say, have used AI that have increased their net promoter score, they see a 10% increase in revenue, right? Those things will start to flush out over time as these things just become more mature, but we just need time.
I really like that example, Josh, right? If it takes less time to get something back to our client, what have we done? We've accomplished the goal of minimizing people touching it. We've accomplished the goal of minimizing errors. And we've also increased our NPS score. So the value out of that is that somebody is getting time back in their day, but we've also raised the profile of our business. So that's compounding value. You've brought the value of getting rid of errors and extra busy work, but you've also increased the value of your organization. In terms of using this for creative type exercises, it helped me write a better proposal. Did it decrease the amount of time for me to create a proposal? Maybe. But I will certainly say that in using AI to help me ideate, think through, analyze, look at different angles of a problem as we're thinking about it for a client, it makes that proposal much better, stronger, which makes the contract that we hopefully sign with them better, which reduces risk on the project for the team that goes to deliver it. So there's multiple pieces to the puzzle that you got to take into account.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly.
I think you call that an interesting thing there, Jonathan, with how we use AI has changed tremendously over the last 18 months. But something you said there around using it as a thought partner, iterating on an idea, a concept. 2 years ago, that was just not something that was on most people's radar. It didn't occur to them to engage in a conversation around how they could plan for the next board meeting or review my strategy on X or Y and use it to prepare. And then the conversation moves into, well, if I put my confidential strategic thoughts into this, what happens if that gets out? What's the AI going to do with my 12-month plan for my company that I'm still working on? It drove that question around, can I trust the system to be that thought partner? Where does that leave me if that data is exposed? So it drove a whole different kind of conversation that we're still teasing out today to a certain extent. But we've gone from Q&A bot to trusted advisor to thought partner in less than 18 months. That's incredible.
Yeah. And because these reasoning models have gotten so much better, right? The smaller models have also increased in their efficacy. And that's why the rise of agentic AI is finally here, because it's much more easier to take these smaller models, put them into business workflows. An organization has done their first AI project, and so they understand what governance and guardrails look like. And now they can start unleashing more optimization, productivity type of things. It's hard because things keep changing.
That's an understatement.
When you first talk agentic to a client and you say you realize that's going to 10x or 100x your token count, you get quite the reaction. And then when you talk to an IT team and say it's going to 10x or 100x your utilization across your platform, are you prepared for that? That drives a completely different kind of conversation on scale and flexibility. That's something that most organizations are still trying to wrap their head around, that if they drop an agentic model in that has planning capability and give it the ability to execute and talk to other models, then you've got this almost creature that can consume your infrastructure, perform actions, hit an API. Maybe it hits the API 500 times a second, and there's 5 agents all asking the same questions. And that has such an impact on infrastructure. If it hasn't been thought through and hasn't been planned, and someone says, well, okay, well, we'll just give it access to our database and it can ask questions. And you can cause some significant outages downstream by very small questions.
You're 100% right. Let's assume governance is in place, security guardrails are in place, no problem. Let the agent ask questions to the database. Will it do it? Yes. Can it get the answer right? Yes. You know what's also going to happen? It's going to keep asking questions. The agent is going to be pounding the database more than users do. So now you've upped your GPU workload and you've upped the workload on the database itself. That sounds like a nightmare for day 2 operation.
Yeah, you made your engine have more horsepower, but then you didn't upgrade the rest of the car. So you go to start it and you hit the gas and like everything else starts to go, but you're just sitting there and you're like, oh, wait, what just happened? It's all got to be thought of as a whole, as opposed to individual parts.
Yeah, and it can have unintended consequences. I mean, the first time I did something with MCP, I was on my local machine. I had a database running, or at least I thought I did. I just said to Claude, and I was using Claude with the MCP plugins. I think it was like almost day 2 after they announced it. And I said, list me the databases. And my expectation was list of databases in my SQL that was running in the container on my machine. But the container wasn't running. So what Claude did, because I had a file system agent running, was it crawled over my entire file system of my machine, found every database file, interrogated that file, and gave me a summary of the database file, what the database file format was, and a small snippet of the contents of that database. Now, it was on my personal system, and that was sort of fine. But if that wasn't, and that was somewhere else, and it started looking over, say, SharePoint and giving me summaries of things that it could find, that's a whole different problem. We're still trying to wrap our heads around how we can put those guardrails and controls in space.
Yeah. There's definitely the security and the governance, which is a big thing. Josh, your analogy, I'm thinking of like, hey, Dad, look, I got a Ferrari engine and put it on my go-kart. Put my foot on the pedal, right? The wheels come off. It's a hot mess. How do you prepare organizations to wrap their head around planning for these types of implications?
It's very difficult to plan, as Robbie just pointed out, right? Unintended consequence that you just never even would have thought of. There's definitely things that you can go out and do and be smart, security-wise, like you said, data governance. And you want to do those things, but then it's really around the understanding and the expectation that we've got to do this incrementally. In a way, we have to try and push things to actually find where it's going to go do things it shouldn't so that we can go and fix it. Because if you go in thinking, oh, well, we've got all of our governance and all of these things set up, that means you've kind of turned a blind eye to things. So there's really got to be that expectation of things like this are going to happen. Okay, how do you prepare the team to respond? And I specifically use respond instead of react. It's going to say, okay, what do we do when this scenario comes up? Who needs to get involved? How do we communicate? Are you monitoring things? What are you monitoring for? Do you have automation? All of these other sorts of things that are in place so that when something happens, you're getting information, you have all the right people together, and they can say, all right, here's what we can go and do. It's not just the technical pieces, but are you operationally, IT and everything else, ready to set up and be a part of this AI adoption? Because it's not just a developer thing that's building agents and deploying it. Big part of this is the operation side. It's no longer just the server's running. Hey, the application you deployed is up and running. If something's wrong, it's on the app team. It's really and truly, just like with DevOps, meant to bring people together. This continues that paradigm. Everybody's got to be brought together to say, okay, what's going on? How do we go ahead and adjust? And what do we need to do to be able to respond? It's just like we're trying stuff in production. Okay, that's fine. You fail forward, you learn, but you're able to respond to it. That's why things like Facebook, they deployed in production so quickly. Why? Because if something is found, they can fix it very quickly. Whereas traditional systems, you didn't want to find anything in production because it might take you a week or two before you ever released a fix. It's all about building all of this into the behavior and the processes and everything else to be able to respond when these things come up.
My mind is thinking all the work that we've been doing over the last 10 years of automation, CI/CD is bringing us to this moment. We're not preparing for a single change. We're preparing our teams for continual change.
Change is inevitable. And as we've seen with automation and DevOps and stuff like that, and now with AI, things just move faster. So before, that change seemed to not happen as often. It used to be, oh, how often will we do this? Well, 6 to 10 times a quarter. Then it became 6 to 10 times a day. Well, now a process is happening more often. And now people are starting to do things more often because in your example, things happening 6 to 10 times a quarter. Well, it was only happening that often, probably because of the process. Well, now you've automated and changed and bring other things in. So now there's new capabilities and things start to happen more often. So that change just happens more often. And that's what you have to be prepared around. So I fully agree and very well said around really what you're preparing for.
The technology changed the business. That's what happened.
Absolutely.
We're seeing that even more so right now with IT ops folks. We started with coding agents, with Claude Code, but we're seeing that being infused into IT ops. So I've got my OpenShift cluster here, and there's an agent sitting there looking at it, and it pops up, and it occasionally says things like, hey, this pod's crashing. Do you want me to restart it? Or it's proactively responding to what's happening in the environment. But also I can do things like, hey, I want to try something out. Here's a GitHub repo. Go deploy this for me. And it will interact with the Kubernetes cluster. It will talk to my OpenShift cluster. It will pull the code down from GitHub. It will come back and say, hey, there's no container here. I'm going to build one for you. It will do all this for me. And yeah, it's my test environment, so I'm happy. And you would never do this in prod. But there are situations where that accelerator of the day-to-day toil that we talked about, emails and things, that applies to IT. We spend a lot of time poking at Kubernetes clusters and VMs and things and looking through log files. And we can use these AI systems to accelerate those workflows. And that drives another level of acceleration, another level of complexity. And then there's a second level of infrastructure. So you've almost got AI infrastructure to support your application infrastructure. That starts to become quite exciting. And we're only just starting to see that with AI infused OpenShift clusters, chatbots that understand how RHEL works and systems like that. But we're not going to slow down. We're going to see that adoption incredibly quickly. And that's exciting from an IT perspective. No longer do I have to remember how I have to configure a firewall. I can just say, hey, this application needs access to the outside world. Can you go and configure that for me? And I don't have to look up 5 pages on AWS on how to configure that now. It can do it for me. That level of IT ops intelligence, we're starting to see it, but that's going to have another impact on enterprises, I believe.
What you really bring up there, Robbie, is it's really about the knowledge worker. Let's say customer in your example is in AWS, and you say, all right, well, I need this firewall. Well, let's say eventually the customer either moves to or expands to Azure or GCP. Is it that you need to know how to go do that in all of those? Probably not important. What's important is that you say, here's what I need the firewall to be. Hey, AI, you go do the heavy lifting. I don't need to know the intricacies, but I do need a firewall to be the same thing. I'll go back to my car analogy, which is when you get in a car, do you need to know how the transmission and the engine and all these other pieces work? No, you want to make sure the door opens and you push the button and the car starts and you push the gas and you go hopefully forward. That's really what it's about, because you're trying to get from point A to point B. You're not trying to say, let me make sure I know how all of these underlying pieces work. And by doing that, that now means that has freed you up to move on to go and do the next thing. Because when it comes to supporting the business, it's not about you knowing how to go and manage all these firewalls. It's making sure that the firewalls are secure in a way to protect data and limit traffic in the way that they should.
Yeah. And as you're going to the store, it's important that you put your seatbelt on, right?
Well, yes. Yes. That's why it dings at you.
Exactly, right? I think an important way for people to be thinking about this, right, is that it's about providing the correct instructions to your agent to accomplish the goal that needs to be done. Instead of knowing yourself how to do it and get it done, now becomes, how do I communicate properly so it gets done? Which takes somebody who's been hands-on keyboard pounding away for years from a direct independent contributor in IC to being a manager of agents. And as everybody knows, communication is hard. You say one thing and you think you know what it means, but sometimes it'll do exactly what you said, which is not what you actually wanted.
Right.
For a developer, when they're writing a YAML file, they understand that. But when they're trying to tell somebody how to write a YAML file, it becomes a different skill that they need to adapt to.
It's communicating intent, isn't it, right? That ultimately means that developers and IT teams move that little bit closer to the business, because they have to understand the intent of the business in order to do their job efficiently, because they have to communicate that to the agents and the AI systems that do change the firewalls and reconfigure things and scale up the OpenShift clusters. That's going to be a shift. I think a positive one. I hope a positive one.
The only thing that is not changing is that everything's changing.
Change is constant.
No, absolutely. And this has been an incredible conversation, gentlemen. Before we close out, are there one or two things that you'd want to leave leaders with? A principle about helping take their AI practice from being that baby to a toddler to a real boy, so to speak?
That's a tough one. I think the big thing is patience. As we've talked about here, constant change. Change is part of this because as humans, we want to be done and move on. That's not really how this works. There is the end in what you're trying to achieve, but this is a process of continuous learning. Years ago, I talked about this on a podcast. I brought up F1. F1 is always taking in massive amounts of data for every lap they're going around the track and everything. And they're not just done. They're constantly evaluating that data and how the car performs because every track is different in every position and the weather and the tires, like everything changes. So all they're trying to do is continually learn and get that, and then they get better, and then they get better. And that's really the thought that needs to be adopted when looking at AI.
Absolutely, Josh. And I think back to the F1 analogy, I worked with some of the F1 teams in the past, and one of the North Stars, the mantras they had was, does it make the car go faster? So every project, you could have an idea, and if you could tie it to that ultimate goal, does it make the car go faster? You could experiment with it. It's the same with AI projects. You have to have a vision in mind, what you're trying to achieve, with the project and move it forward. But equally, there is a time where you can say, this isn't making the car going faster. We need to start again. And that's hard for people to accept that actually we've gone down a path with a project and it's not doing what we want it to do. We need to go back. We need to take a different route, take a different design, different architecture, a different AI model. Keep the North Star. Does it make the car go faster? But start again. Because not every project, especially with AI, because it's changing so rapidly, is going to reach production and be the success you want it to be. But every project you are going to learn, you are going to move forward. That is the value of the project. We have learned so much. Now we take the coding model away from the developers. They scream and shout, and we give them a better toy in 3 weeks' time when we've tuned it a little bit more. But that's one of the key learnings I've taken over the last few years is you have to learn with every project, but not every project is going to be that successful AI project that is going to be up on the corporate website saying, hey, look how amazing we are. One of them will be absolutely. But as we've learned with DevOps, you've got to go around that loop a few times to get that success, to get that learning and that muscle memory.
I think those are both incredible points. And I think one thing I heard you both say implicitly, but not explicitly, right, is it's the observation, it's the analysis of what's going on and the continual iteration. You've got to keep watching. You've got to be paying attention because it's going to change. And therefore, you've got to find a way to adapt. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. It's been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Robbie. Thank you, Jonathan.
If there's one theme I'm walking away with from this conversation, it's this. AI is running without a roadmap because there isn't one. And it's accelerating with a complexity we can't quantify. Although we have to do our best to try. Both Josh and Robbie's stories made it clear that your ability to predict scale is going to be a challenge. When something is useful and everyone wants access to it, the community will unintentionally stress test the system. And if they don't, agentic AI will. So sometimes you have to gate it, roll it out slowly, and protect the platform so you don't break what you're trying so hard to build. And on the ROI side, Josh made a key point. Leaders want, if I spend X, I expect Y. But early AI value is often best measured through outcomes like time back, faster client response, client satisfaction. It is compounding efficiency and value over time. So to me and to my guests today, it comes down to a matter of understanding the intent of the business, setting expectations that align, and committing to continuous iteration and learning and reflection until you get it right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Edge of IT. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your favorite shows.